The night of December 28, 1941, over the frozen, snow-dusted landscape of Central Europe, the drone of a Halifax bomber breaks the immense silence. Inside, two men stand ready, their faces illuminated by the stark red light of the cabin. They are not soldiers in a conventional sense. They carry no regimental banners, no orders for a frontal assault. Their equipment is specialized, their mission singular, their existence a closely guarded secret. They are phantoms dispatched from the shadows of a war being fought on a different front. As the green light flashes, they step out into the void, into the black, biting cold of the winter sky. Below them lies not a battlefield, but their own homeland, now a province of the Third Reich. A land crushed under the heel of an occupation so precise, so systematic in its cruelty, that it has become a laboratory for oppression. They are falling into the heart of the beast with the express purpose of cutting out its heart. Their success is uncertain. Their survival, improbable. Their target, a man considered by many, even within the Nazi hierarchy, to be the most dangerous man in Europe. This is the story of a mission of almost unimaginable audacity, an act of defiance aimed not at an army, but at a single individual. The architect of the Holocaust. To understand the magnitude of their task, one must first understand the man they were sent to kill. His name was Reinhard Heydrich. He was not a brutish thug or a rabid ideologue in the mold of so many of his peers. He was something far more terrifying, a man of immense intellect, chilling ambition, and a complete and utter absence of morality. He was the cold, calculating engine of the Nazi terror apparatus. Born in 1904 into a cultured musical family, the young Heydrich was a gifted violinist, a champion fencer, and an accomplished athlete. He seemed destined for a conventional, successful life. He joined the German Navy, rising quickly through the ranks. But his naval career was cut short by a scandal. A broken engagement promised to the daughter of a shipyard director, leading to his dismissal in 1931. Cast out, unemployed, and embittered, Heydrich found a new home in the fledgling Nazi Party. It was here that his unique and sinister talents would find their ultimate expression. Recruited by Heinrich Himmler, Heydrich was tasked with building the intelligence service of the SS, the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD. From a tiny office and a handful of index cards, he created a sprawling, omniscient network of spies and informants that reached into every corner of German society. He meticulously catalogued enemies of the state, real and perceived. He was a master of blackmail, political intrigue, and bureaucratic warfare. His cool, detached efficiency unnerved even senior Nazi officials. Adolf Hitler himself reputedly called him the man with the iron heart. By the late 1930s, Heydrich's power was immense. He was the chief of the Reich Security Main Office, the RSHA, a vast organization that fused the SD, the Gestapo, and the criminal police into a single, terrifying instrument of state control. It was Heydrich who masterminded the faked Polish attack on a German radio station at Gliwice, providing the pretext for the invasion of Poland and the start of the Second World War. It was Heydrich who organized the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads that followed the Wehrmacht into Poland and the Soviet Union, murdering over 2 million people, mostly Jews, in a wave of systematic mass shootings. In September 1941, Hitler gave him a new critical assignment. He was appointed Deputy Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, the former nation of Czechoslovakia. The Czech resistance had been a persistent thorn in the side of the Reich, disrupting war production and engaging in acts of sabotage. Heydrich's mission was simple: to crush it permanently. He arrived in Prague and immediately instituted a reign of terror. He declared martial law, and in his first few days, hundreds of Czech patriots, intellectuals, former military officers, politicians, were arrested, summarily tried, and executed. His methods were brutal but surgically effective. The resistance networks were shattered. Yet Heydrich also employed a cynical policy he called whip and sugar. While the whip fell on the resistance, he offered sugar to the Czech workers. He increased food rations, improved social benefits, and organized paid holidays. He understood that a cowed and compliant workforce was more productive than one seething with active rebellion. This devious strategy was working. Active resistance dwindled, and the vital Czech arms industry, crucial to the German war effort, ran smoother than ever. Heydrich, now living in splendor in a castle outside Prague, was the undisputed, feared, and effective master of the Protectorate. It was during his time in Prague that Heydrich was given his most infamous task. On January 20, 1942, he convened a meeting of senior Nazi officials at a villa on the shores of Lake Wannsee, outside Berlin. The minutes of this meeting, discovered after the war, are one of the most chilling documents in human history. In a calm, bureaucratic tone, the Wannsee Conference formalized the plan for what was euphemistically called the final solution to the Jewish question. It was the blueprint for the industrial-scale extermination of 11 million European Jews, and Reinhard Heydrich was its chairman, its chief architect, the man who would oversee the machinery of the Holocaust. While Heydrich consolidated his power in Prague, another group of men, 1,000 miles away in London, were watching with growing alarm. This was the Czechoslovak government in exile, led by its president, Edvard Benes. For Benes, Heydrich's success was a political catastrophe. Not only was the resistance in his homeland being systematically dismantled, but the very legitimacy of his government was at stake. The Allies, particularly Britain, viewed the Czechs as a conquered people who had offered little resistance. The Munich Agreement of 1938, where Britain and France had appeased Hitler by handing him the Sudetenland, still cast a long shadow. Benes was desperate to prove that his nation was still fighting, that his people were a worthy and active ally. He needed a spectacular act, something that would capture the world's attention, inspire his people, and demonstrate to the Allies that the Czech spirit was not broken. He needed to strike a blow so significant it could not be ignored. The target was obvious. They had to kill Reinhard Heydrich. The idea was radical, even reckless. An assassination of this magnitude against a high-ranking Nazi official had never been attempted. The risk of reprisal against the civilian population was immense. Many within Benes's own government and the Czech resistance on the ground argued fiercely against it. They warned that the cost would be too high, that Heydrich's death would unleash a storm of vengeance that would drown the nation in blood. But Benes, in consultation with the head of his military intelligence, František Moravec, was resolute. The political imperative outweighed the military risk. Moravec argued that a significant act of resistance was necessary to force the British to formally repudiate the Munich Agreement, thereby ensuring the post-war restoration of Czechoslovakia's pre-1938 borders. The assassination was to be a political statement, written in blood. The instrument for this audacious plan would be the British Special Operations Executive, or SOE. Formed in 1940 under the direct order of Winston Churchill, the SOE's mandate was simple and clandestine: set Europe ablaze. It was an organization dedicated to sabotage, espionage, and supporting resistance movements in occupied territory. It was the perfect partner for Benes's desperate gambit. From the ranks of the 2,500 Czechoslovak soldiers who had escaped to Britain after the fall of France, Moravec and the SOE began to select candidates. They were looking for men who were not just brave, but resourceful, disciplined, and utterly committed. They had to be fluent in Czech, physically fit, and mentally tough enough to operate alone, deep behind enemy lines for months on end. 2 men emerged from this rigorous selection process. The first was Warrant Officer Josef Gabčík. He was a Slovak, a former locksmith, tough, quiet, and intensely patriotic. He had a natural aptitude for mechanics and weaponry. The second was Staff Sergeant Jan Kubis, a Czech from Moravia. He was more outgoing than his partner, but equally determined. They had been friends since their service in the French Foreign Legion and later in the Czechoslovak Army in France. They trusted each other implicitly. A vital quality for a 2-man team, their training was brutal and comprehensive, conducted at a series of secret SOE special training schools in the secluded countryside of Britain, particularly at Arisaig on the rugged west coast of Scotland. Here, under the tutelage of battle-hardened British Commandos, they learned the dark arts of irregular warfare. They were trained in parachuting, silent killing with knives and garrots, and the use of explosives, including the specialized bombs they would carry on their mission. They mastered Morse code, cryptography, and the techniques of clandestine life: how to establish a cover story, how to detect a tail, how to endure interrogation. They were molded into professional assassins. The plan was code-named Operation Anthropoid. Gabčík and Kubis would be its 2 primary agents. They would be parachuted into the Protectorate, where they would make contact with the local resistance, gather intelligence, and plan the attack. The SOE equipped them with forged papers, money, civilian clothes, a radio set, pistols, and 2 specialized weapons. Gabčík was given a Sten submachine gun, a simple but effective British weapon. Kubis was armed with specially modified anti-tank grenades designed to be thrown, not fired. Their weight had been reduced to make them more suitable for an assassination attempt. On the night of December 28th, after several weather-related delays, the mission began. Gabčík and Kubis, along with several other teams on separate missions, boarded a Halifax bomber at RAF Tangmere. Their target drop zone was near the city of Plzeň, where they had contacts in the resistance. But from the very beginning, things went wrong. Navigational errors, common in the era before modern guidance systems, meant the pilot had difficulty locating the drop zone. When Gabčík and Kubis finally jumped, they were miles off course. Instead of landing in a relatively safe rural area near Plzeň, they landed near Nehovízdy, just east of Prague. It was a far more dangerous location, closer to the center of German power. To make matters worse, Kubis injured his ankle on the landing. They had also lost some of their equipment. Alone, slightly injured and in the wrong place, their first task was one of survival. They hid their parachutes and equipment, and using their wits and their cover stories began the perilous journey to make contact. They first sought help at a farmhouse claiming to be students who had lost their way. The mission hung by a thread. A single suspicious citizen, a single police check, could have ended it before it had truly begun. Through a combination of luck and training, they eventually found their way to their pre-arranged contacts in Plzeň and then on to Prague. For the next 5 months, Gabčík and Kubis lived a clandestine existence in the capital, moving between a network of safe houses provided by brave members of the Czech resistance. Families like the Moravecs, the Novaks, and the Svatas risked everything to shelter them. Living in Prague was a life of constant grinding tension. The city was crawling with Gestapo agents and informers. A wrong word, a misplaced accent, a moment of carelessness could mean arrest, torture, and death, not just for them, but for everyone who helped them. Their primary task was reconnaissance. They needed to study Heydrich's movements, his routines, his security detail. This proved to be a difficult task. Heydrich was a man of routine, but also of unpredictable changes. He commuted daily from his residence in the village of Panenské Breziny to his headquarters at Prague Castle. His car, an open-topped dark green Mercedes-Benz, was a familiar sight. In a display of supreme arrogance, Heydrich often traveled with only his driver, SS Oberscharführer Johannes Klein. He believed the Czechs were so thoroughly pacified that he had nothing to fear. He wanted to project an image of confidence and control. This arrogance would prove to be his fatal weakness. The assassins, working with their local resistance contacts, including Josef Valčík and Adolf Apalka, who had been parachuted in on a separate mission, began to formulate a plan. They considered several options, including an attack on a train or an ambush near his castle. But these were deemed too risky or complex. They finally settled on a location in the Prague suburb of Liban. Here, Heydrich's car would have to slow down to navigate a sharp downhill hairpin bend. It was the perfect choke point, offering a clear line of attack and a chance, however slim, of escape into the crowded city streets. The date was set for May 27, 1942. The morning was bright and clear. Gabčík, Kubis, and Valčík, who would act as a lookout, took up their positions. Gabčík concealed himself near the bend, his Sten gun hidden under a raincoat. Kubis stood across the street, his briefcase containing the modified grenades. Valčík was positioned about 100 yards up the road to signal the car's approach with a small mirror. The minutes ticked by. The tension was unbearable. A tram passed, its bell ringing, momentarily blocking their view. Then Valčík flashed the signal. The green Mercedes was approaching. As the car slowed for the turn, Gabčík stepped from the shadows, threw off his raincoat, and raised the Sten gun. He took aim at the uniformed figure of Reinhard Heydrich and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun had jammed. In that split second, the entire operation, months of planning and sacrifice, teetered on the brink of catastrophic failure. Heydrich and his driver, Klein, saw Gabčík. In a fatal error of judgment, instead of ordering Klein to accelerate away, the supremely confident Heydrich ordered him to stop. He stood up in the car, drawing his pistol to engage the assassin himself. This gave Jan Kubis his opening. As Heydrich stood, Kubis lobbed his bomb towards the car. He misjudged the throw. The grenade didn't land inside the vehicle, but instead detonated against the rear right wheel. The explosion was devastating. It blew a hole in the car's bodywork, shattered the windows, and sent a shower of metal fragments and debris flying through the air. Both Kubis and Heydrich were wounded by the blast. Kubis was struck in the face by shrapnel, his vision momentarily blurred. Heydrich, though initially appearing unharmed, had been grievously wounded. A fragment of the bomb, carrying with it pieces of metal and horsehair upholstery from the car seat, had pierced his back, fracturing a rib and tearing his diaphragm and spleen. In the chaos, Gabčík threw down the useless Sten gun and ran. Klein, the driver, pursued him on foot but was shot in the leg by Gabčík's pistol and gave up the chase. Kubis, bleeding from his face, jumped on his bicycle and pedaled prodigiously away. Heydrich, fueled by adrenaline, staggered from the wrecked car, drew his pistol and tried to fire at Kubis, but he was too weak. He collapsed against the bonnet of the car, clutching his side. The Czech woman pulisa him to a passing delivery van, which transported him to the nearby Bulovka hospital. The assassins had escaped. They had wounded their target, but they did not know if the wound was fatal. They split up and went to ground, seeking refuge in their network of safe houses. At the hospital, Heydrich was initially conscious and in considerable pain. The doctors who examined him discovered the serious internal injuries. The chief of surgery, Professor Hallbaum, operated immediately, removing the damaged spleen. For a few days it seemed Heydrich might recover. Himmler sent his personal physician, Karl Gebhardt, to oversee his care, but the wound was contaminated. The debris that had entered Heydrich's body carried bacteria, leading to a massive systemic infection. In an era before penicillin was widely available, septicemia was a death sentence. Heydrich's condition worsened. He slipped into a coma, and on the morning of June 4, 1942, 8 days after the attack, Reinhard Heydrich, the butcher of Prague, the architect of the Holocaust, was dead. The Nazi response was immediate, swift, and of a ferocity that shocked the world. Even before Heydrich's death, a state of emergency had been declared. A massive manhunt was launched, with a reward of 10 million Czech crowns offered for information leading to the assassin's capture. Prague was sealed. Mass arrests began. Thousands were rounded up, interrogated, and many were executed without trial. The Nazis were determined to make an example of the Czech nation. The hunt for the paratroopers was relentless. The Gestapo, under the command of SS Gruppenführer Karl Hermann Frank, Heydrich's deputy, tore apart the resistance networks that had sheltered them. The brave families who had given them safe houses were arrested. The Morawitz family, who had been central to their support, was targeted. The mother, Marie Morawitz, bit down on a cyanide capsule she kept hidden as the Gestapo broke down her door, choosing death over a betrayal under torture. Her husband and son were taken to Mauthausen concentration camp and later executed. Despite the terror, the surviving paratroopers, Gabčík, Kubis, and 5 others from different SOE missions who had joined them, found a final desperate hiding place. They were given sanctuary by the bishop of the Czech Orthodox Church in the crypt of the Cathedral of Saints Cyril and Methodius in central Prague. For 3 weeks, they hid in the cold, damp darkness beneath the church, a fate in the hands of the priests who sheltered them. The end came through betrayal. A member of one of the other parachute teams, a man named Karol Kurda, broke under the pressure of the manhunt and the fear for his family's safety. He went to the Gestapo and, for the reward and a promise of immunity, he told them everything he knew. He identified the assassins from photographs, named the safe houses, and, crucially, led them to the cathedral. In the pre-dawn hours of June 18th, the Gestapo surrounded the church. 700 SS troops were brought in to carry out the assault. The battle began when the Germans tried to storm the main church area. 3 of the paratroopers, including Jan Kubis and Adolf Apolka, were on watch in the choir loft. They fought back with any pistols and a single submachine gun, holding off the overwhelming German force for 2 hours in a heroic but hopeless gun battle. They were all eventually killed or, when mortally wounded and out of ammunition, took their own lives. The remaining 4, including Josef Gabčík, were hidden in the crypt below. The Germans discovered the entrance to the crypt, a stone slab hidden under a carpet. They tried to storm it, but were beaten back by gunfire from the darkness. They then tried to flush the men out, pumping in tear gas and then water from fire hoses. Through a small ventilation slit level with the street, the paratroopers managed to push the fire hoses back out. Fighting for every last moment, for hours the 4 men held off the might of the SS. They knew there was no escape. Their only remaining goal was to die as soldiers on their own terms. When their ammunition was nearly exhausted and the water in the crypt was rising, they used their last bullets on themselves. The battle for the cathedral was over. The last stand of Operation Anthropoid had ended in silence. The vengeance of the Reich was not yet sated. To make an example that would be seared into the memory of Europe, Hitler and Himmler ordered a reprisal of unparalleled brutality. They chose 2 villages, Lidice and Lizaki, which were falsely accused of harboring the assassins. On June 10th, SS troops surrounded the small mining village of Lidice. All 173 men and boys over the age of 15 were rounded up, taken to a farm on the edge of the village, and shot in groups of 10. The 184 women were sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp. The children, except for a few deemed suitable for Germanization, were taken to the Chelmno extermination camp and murdered in gas vans. The village of Lidis was then systematically destroyed. Every building was dynamited, bulldozed, and leveled, until not a stone was left standing. The very name was erased from German maps. A few weeks later, the village of Lizaki, which had harbored a resistance radio transmitter, met a similar fate. Its adult inhabitants were shot, and the village burned to the ground. The cost of Operation Anthropoid was staggering. In the reprisals that followed Heydrich's death, it is estimated that some 5,000 Czechs were murdered. The pre-existing Czech resistance network was almost completely annihilated. For decades, historians and the Czech people themselves have debated the question, was it worth it? Did the assassination of one man justify the ensuing slaughter of thousands of innocents? The answer is complex and remains contentious. From a purely military perspective, the operation was a disaster. It crippled the domestic resistance and resulted in a horrific loss of life. But from the political perspective of Edvard Beneš, the mission was a qualified, brutal success. The sheer savagery of the Nazi reprisals, the destruction of Lidis, shocked the world. It exposed the true nature of the Nazi regime in a way that battlefield reports never could. In response to this wave of global outrage, the British government, followed by the French, formally and publicly repudiated the Munich Agreement. This act guaranteed the post-war restoration of Czechoslovakia's full pre-1938 sovereignty. Beneš had achieved his primary political objective. The sacrifice had cemented his nation's place among the Allies. Today, in the crypt of the Cathedral of Saints Cyril and Methodius, the bullet-scarred walls and the small memorial to the 7 paratroopers stand as a silent testament to their last stand. Jan Kubis and Josef Gabčík are revered as national heroes in the Czech and Slovak republics. Their mission remains one of the most audacious and personally costly acts of targeted assassination of the entire war. It was an operation born of political desperation, executed with incredible courage, and paid for with a terrible price in blood. It stands as a stark reminder that in the total war against the Third Reich, victory and tragedy were often one and the same. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories.